This PowerPoint presentation is about slave revolts in the South during the colonization period of the United States. Discussed therein will be a few sources on research of certain revolts and why they are important in understanding why they took place. Slave revolts were an inevitable consequence in shipping Africans over for cheaper free labor. There were a few key reasons that the revolts occurred. Oppression was always a large reason, as was the desire for freedom. And surprisingly enough, religion also played a large role, as will be seen a little later on in the PowerPoint. Whatever the reasons, however, everybody was affected by the revolts. Whether you were in on them or not, or if you were a victim that was killed, or part of the panicked rabble that grew paranoid of the revolts to come, unfortunately nobody was immune. The secondary source article I went with for this presentation was this anthology by Thomas Wentworth Higginson. It chronicles 5 slave revolts that occurred in South America and the U.S. 3 of the U.S. revolts were all black slave rebellions. One was the infamous Nat Turner Rebellion, and the other 2 were actually thwarted revolts that were supposed to happen. One was by Gabriel Presser, and the other was Denmark Vesey. And all of them have detailed research on interrogations by Negroes who were in on each of the revolts, mostly in the 2 that were thwarted. There was also a chronological order of events as they happened, all the planning, what was going to happen, and everything like that. And one interesting thing I found was all of the parallels between the 3 rebel leaders. They were all considered very intelligent. They were all, they were either free men, or they were all very much respected by their peers and their slave owners, their masters. And they were all extremely religious. And they all actually used religion in some sort of way as their precursor to why they were leading these revolts in the first place. So a lot of parallels between them, and I found that very fascinating. The Confessions of Nat Turner is considered to be one of the most famous documents on slave insurrection in U.S. history. It was recorded by Thomas R. Gray, who was a Virginia lawyer who had many conversations with Nat Turner, and Turner openly, on his own free will, gave him an entire full confession of the insurrection. In the confession, he starts off in his childhood. When Turner was about 4 or 5, he made some statement about an event that occurred before he was born. His mom, who was extremely religious, saw this as a sign that her son had very special divine powers. And as he would grow up, he would show it off more. He started having visions. He started hearing voices. And the people in his community considered him a prophet. And he believed in this insurrection, in that he was given a mission from the divine, from God, that he was supposed to lead a revolt for these people. The account of the whole insurrection is incredibly detailed. It is very graphic. It was very difficult to read in some parts, and it was unpleasant. It was unpleasant to read, but it was interesting to read everything. And he only openly confessed, ironically, to killing 1 person throughout the entire revolt, and that was actually a young woman. He goes on to say where he went hiding and how he was found. He was found by a dog who smelled the meat he was hiding to eat, because he had been hiding in a foxhole for 2 months. And it was the entire confession is eye-opening and very, very disturbing to read. So continuing on with the religious aspect of the revolts, the scholarly article chosen for this was written by John K. Thornton, and he wrote an article titled African Dimensions of the Stoner Rebellion. A little back history on the Stoner Rebellion was that a group of Congolese people from the Kingdom of Congo, which is modern-day Angola, were persuaded by the Spanish Empire to invade St. Augustine in Spanish-occupied Florida. And in return, they would get freedom, they would get religious freedom, because ironically, in the Kingdom of Congo, they were converted to Christianity in the 1400s. So they actually practiced Christianity and Catholicism, as you can see in the picture. There is a Portuguese priest doing Mass, and there are a bunch of Africans that are attending Mass with him. On the way, they stopped in Charleston, and there were about 60 people killed, and they also did like some sort of like almost war dance, like a tribal dance. And as they kept going down to Florida, they kept having more people, more slaves, join them in the revolt. And Thornton in this argues that other historians haven't really taken into consideration the African roots of these people that could come into play for the reasons behind the revolt as well, in the matters of culture and the way of life, and how they ended up living that way when they came into the New World. These are just a few of the several examples of the slave revolts that occurred in the U.S. during the colonial times. At the time, there were even radical abolitionists whom, even though they didn't lead any physical insurrections, they very strongly suggested standing up to oppression and their masters, even if it resorted to violence. It's anything that could get the job done. They didn't care. And I thought that was another really interesting thing to learn. And trying to understand the relationships between the reasons for the rebellion and the mind of the leaders, such as Nat Turner, who actually grew up believing that he was a prophet and he was sent by God to take care of the people and act up against the whites in rebellion. It's not surprising to see that they found violence to be completely necessary. Unfortunately, in that aspect, it doesn't make it justifiable, and it is inconceivable because there were so many people that died, and not just whites, there were blacks that died. Not only even just the people that were involved with the revolts, it was innocent people. The repercussions of the revolts were devastating. There were what were called musters that white troops would, mostly like what were considered low whites, would go and, quote, inspect, end quote, blacks' houses, and they would raid everything, and they would lash men, women, and children to get answers from them about anything involving the rebellions and anything like that. And it was really heartbreaking, very extremely heartbreaking to read about that as well. So anyway it is looked at, in the end, you either live through it or you die.